Hi, hello. This is Son of a Sports, and as we all know, last offseason, the NBA signed a new CBA. Owners and the Players Association alike signed a new deal that changed some things, added a new second tax apron to the NBA landscape. A lot of new rules were implemented. NBA players are allowed to smoke weed now without any issues. There's a lot that's changed. Today, we are going to talk about NBA money and the second tax apron and the first tax apron and what has changed, because there's a lot of teams that are starting to change, and this is the most parity era that we have seen in a long time, maybe ever, in the NBA. Any team can win it. Right now, the Dallas Mavericks, who missed the playoffs last year, are in the NBA Finals. So, this is Son of a Sports. Let's get into it. Before we even get into the second tax apron, let's talk about the first one. The salary cap set for the 2024-2025 season is set at $141 million. The first apron, where teams start being penalized and hurt for spending too much money going into the luxury tax, is set at $178,655,000. Teams won't be penalized until they hit that number in the luxury tax, because that number has there's always been a first apron since 2011 to prevent super teams, but now there's a second apron. But let's talk about the first apron's issues first. Jake Fisher from Yahoo Sports did an article, which I will link below, about what the new issues are. Under the new CBA, teams over the first apron will now be limited to matching salaries and trades to 100% of their outgoing money. Teams that are non-taxpayer teams can make the math work within 25%. In short, teams can't take in more money than they're trading out. These clubs are also barred from signing a player waived during the regular season if his salary exceeds that year's mid-level exception. The Boston Celtics, Denver Nuggets, Golden State Warriors, Miami Heat, Milwaukee Bucks, Phoenix Suns, and LA Clippers were all impacted by this rule last year. There's guys like Blake Griffin or Russell Westbrook that probably, when they get cut by that team that year, they wouldn't be able to go to the team that they signed to, like Blake Griffin with the Nets in 2021 and Russell Westbrook with the Lakers to the Clippers in 2023. These teams would not be able to go sign the guys like they have in previous years. Okay, now let's talk about the second tax apron. How much would a team need to spend to be in that second tax apron? Well, it's a lot of money. A lot of money. $189,486,000 to be exact. Yeah. A team would have to spend over that to be in the second tax apron. And what are the penalties that come with that? Well, team can no longer use their mid-level exception. They can't trade their own first-round pick that is 7 years in the future. They can't use a trade exception from the previous season. They can't include cash in trades. A team's first-round pick is moved to the end of the round if they remain in the second apron for 3 out of 5 seasons. And that one is massive, because teams at that point would have to start committing to thinking about, okay, do we go in a rebuild, or do we start shedding salary within 5 years? How many years can we actually compete with this core out of 5 seasons? Teams would have to start reevaluating themselves. And that would start switching things up, because at that point, too, I think the new CBA also says 2 out of 4 seasons you can't have a team that's above the second apron without having your first-round pick move to the end of the first round. Okay, let's talk about teams that are affected. What are some examples of teams that are going to be affected by this? Well, let's start with the Denver Nuggets. Aaron Gordon, Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, obviously, and Michael Porter Jr. all make a lot of money. Jokic makes $51.5 million next year. Murray and Michael Porter Jr. both make around $36 million. Gordon's an extension eligible while also making $23.5 million, or $23 million. And KCP has a chance to opt out and is rumored to, because he's projected to get around $20 million next year at 31 years old. This new CBA is built for role players to get money and not take pay cuts on contending teams. Right now, they will be in the second apron next year, with being $7.5 million above the second tax apron. At currently, their tax or their cap number will be $196,927,738. They are the second top spending team in the league in terms of active roster, and they still don't know whether they can bring KCP back or not. This team has a lot of questions, and the front office is going to have to address that, because this team wasn't built around this current CBA. It was built around the last one. So now you have to draft and do all that, and they don't know what they can do. And the questions that come with this is, like, Michael Porter Jr. Do you trade him? Because he is a $36 million player next year, and he didn't play very well in the second round against Minnesota. You can't really keep your core like you really wanted to for a dynasty, even though you drafted well, even though you only made one big trade for Aaron Gordon where you traded multiple firsts. And you still traded for KCP, but he wasn't a massive contract. He was a role player. You made the right decisions. You made the right moves. You did all of it. You still weren't able, you're still hampered by this new CBA no matter what, even if you make the right moves. Okay, let's look at the Timberwolves, who just lost in 5 in the Western Conference Finals after having their best season in around 20 years. They did incredible, but I heard early in the season from Timberwolves fans that they were going to have cap issues the next year, and they're even worse than what I thought they were going to be. The Timberwolves are also considering selling the team. Glenn Taylor has been in talks with A-Rod and Mark Lore for a few seasons now about whether or not he can get them to buy the team, and I think it's close. But Glenn Taylor reportedly has had concerns with whether or not A-Rod and Mark Lore go into deep luxury tax for the next few years because this team is at a contending level. It's funny because Glenn Taylor's never reached the luxury tax, and now that the luxury tax is worse than it's ever been, he's now concerned. But with that being said, he is concerned, and there are concerns with this team because there's only 10 guys on the active roster for next year, and they're already in the second apron. Looking at the Timberwolves roster, you see Cat making around $50 million a year. Rudy's got $44 million, and I think he's a free agent the year after with a player option. Anthony Edwards' contract comes in extension, $42 and $300,000. Jaden McDaniels' contract extension comes in, $23 million. Nas has one more year, I think, with $14 million with a player option for the next year. And looking at their tax apron, they are still above it. They currently would be $6.5 million above the second tax apron, so they would still be limited there. And there's a chance the Timberwolves just say, let's go into the second tax apron for 1 year, and then in 2025, or for 2 years, and then in 2025, 2026, let's get off Rudy, maybe even Cat, because I think Cat's extension comes in then, or no. Either way, that's where Mike Conley's contract would end, Rudy's contract would end, and that's where Ant and Jaden McDaniels and maybe Cat move forward with a new roster. Even then, though, there's still going to be questions this offseason because maybe this new ownership doesn't want to go into that second tax apron. Maybe Glenn Taylor doesn't want to do that himself. Maybe the reports were wrong. The issue is there's still going to be questions. There's still going to be people throwing out there, okay, is Cat done in Minnesota? Do they trade Cat? Because he would be the odd man out. He struggled in the playoffs. He would be making the most money on the team. And Rudy was the defensive player of the year. You're obviously not going to trade Ant. And Jaden McDaniels is $23 million. I don't even know if you can move him like that. You definitely could move Cat, though. And that's the thing. How do you move him if you were? And do you even want to? Because you just had your most successful season in 20 years. And we all saw this year how a second apron or how tax implications would affect the team. Phoenix was extremely limited to build a roster around Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, and Devin Booker. And they got swept in the first round. They signed a lot of limited guys and minimum players so they could try to build a roster around these guys, and it didn't really work out. Then you see Houston, who, this is another thing with the CBA that's pretty interesting. This has nothing to do with the second tax apron, but a little bit. They were forced to sign a lot of players despite having a lot of cap space. This is what a lot of the CBA is about. Allowing minimum guys, or not minimum guys, allowing the mid-level guys, allowing the guys that typically would not get supermax deals, guys that would not be on contending teams making supermax deals to make that supermax or top-tier money on the mid-teams. It forces mid-teams and bad teams to pay and spend a lot of money. Houston had around, I want to say $60 million, maybe even more than that in last year's free agency. I think it was maybe near 80. They used it on giving Fred VanVleet a max deal, giving Dylan Brooks a $22 million, $88 million deal for 4 years. They had to pay Jeff Green. They had to pay Jacques Landale. And they had a lot of rookies coming in too, but they had to spend money. And that's what the CBA forces too. A lot of those mid-tier players, and I don't want to say mid-tier and call them bad because everyone's good at basketball. It's the NBA. But these guys that don't typically get paid all the money in the world, especially on contenders, are going to make money somewhere else. And that leads to guys like KCP potentially leaving the Denver Nuggets. It leads to Milwaukee having to be limited in what they can do in terms of roster changes. And next year, I think they're still under the second tax apron, or they're not at that second tax apron spot, but they're right next to it. Boston will be in that situation, but Boston still has a lot of guys locked up for now. But it does add a potential scenario where Boston will have to get rid of Derek White. All these situations exist. And I know this video is about math and money and tax, and I probably was all over the place and just really made it more difficult for y'all to understand. I hope at least someone watches this, and I hope that person can walk away with having a better understanding of what the second tax apron does now. I know it's a little unorganized, and I know I don't get a lot of viewers yet, but this is Son of a Sports, and a lot of big things are coming. I'll catch y'all next time.